Politics. I am co-host of Wait What? Politics with Zuma and Steele. And normally I come from I broadcast from Zop Studio in Washington, D.C. But today I'm in a decommissioned ICBM silo near Tucson. It's the secret headquarters of Antifa West. So don't tell anybody. And Street Fight Politics is a discussion-based show based on the idea that politics is no place for turning the other cheek. Each episode, each of us will bring a topic and we'll beat it to death. So let's get going. Ed?
I'm up. Well, one of the things that we will be talking about is, in our current course, is there going to be violence surrounding an election? What is the possibility of that? And so, I decided to go back and look through history and see what history has to tell us, and the news isn't good. You can go all the way back to ancient Greece, and you will find that politics and violence have been handmaidens with each other for 5,000 years. You go back, you look at Rome, and if you know anything about Rome with the bread and circuses, they were the first people to institutionalize the use of mobs and crowd control. And when you go back and analyze the politics of it, you really have to break this down into the elites of society controlling the crowd, in Greek demos, and the belief pretty much all through history that if you let a crowd get out of control, you've got a mob, and that's what essentially we're afraid is happening now, that we've got, in my opinion at least, two crowds, two mobs, both on different sides of the political fence and both with, very different agendas. And the chance that those two, they have been interacting, the chance that they interact after the election, I think, is almost a certainty.
Well, we're seeing that now with the most recent news that there was a white nationalist group that planned to kidnap Governor Whitmer in Michigan, kill some cops, and start a civil war. Now, this is, of course, the theme. Timothy McVeigh had the same theme. He bombed the Murrah building. He intended to start a civil war. These guys always want to start a civil war. They never actually pull it off. Well, but I want to take issue with the idea that Black Lives Matter protesters are a mob. I attended the Black Lives Matter protests, and I'm affiliated with Black Lives Matter in Washington, D.C., and I didn't see a mob. I saw a bunch of young, middle-aged, and older people.
And here's the difference is that when you look at the people in charge, they will do everything they can to make them a mob. Now, you were in a crowd of like-minded people. You all had the same goals. Mm-hmm. But that's scary for the people that are in charge. And so it doesn't matter that, the leaders that set up things are trying to make sure everybody doesn't be violent, don't throw rocks at anybody, don't, say bad names to the cops or do anything. It just mm-hmm. takes one act, and that allows the people that are in charge to come down with the full weight of the state. And it's like we've seen that,
right.
Time and again over the last few months.
And I can tell you from all the protests I've been to in my entire life, but especially from these Black Lives Matters protesters, that it doesn't even take one thing. It doesn't take one thing. That photo op that Trump did in Lafayette Park was those people were totally civil and civilized and not aggressive in any way. They were peacefully protesting when they were attacked. And I've seen this over and over and over. People will be peacefully protesting, the police will attack, and that's what causes the chaos.
Now, there was something that occurred in that should be really frightening to anybody, is that you saw people that had no markings that they were in any official capacity in unmarked vans roll up, take people, throw them in like this was the Stasi in East Germany, mm-hmm. during the 50s and 60s, and take them away. That is something that is the behavior not of a democracy or a republic. That's an act of a fascist.
Right. It's very similar to the way things worked in fascist Russia and in fascist Germany and in fascist Italy. We've seen this over and over. I mean, this is the playbook that the Trump administration is now using, the playbook of fascism, to try and create a crisis and capitalize on it.
Well,
Now,
I'll take that, a step further. It's like we can denigrate it and call it fascism, which I believe it is, but I look at it as Trump is the master showman, and he knows how to control a crowd. I mean, the comparisons with Hitler are very trite, and I think are overdone, but they both had the ability to get out, be showmen, basically hypnotize a crowd. And how many times have we heard that Trump's followers would do anything for him? And, I think we saw that in Michigan. He says, let's liberate Michigan. These guys take that as, okay, we've got our marching orders. Let's go, do a violent overthrow, of a democratically elected government.
yeah, well, I don't think the comparisons to Hitler are overstated or trite or overused. I think they're spot on. And I do think that there's more going on here than a guy that knows how to be a TV host. He knows how to move a TV crowd or be popular on TV. There's more going on here than that. This is a deliberate attempt to undermine democracy. It's a good thing they're fairly incompetent. And, Jason Stanley, a fascism expert, once told me that the thing about fascist governments is they hire based on loyalty rather than competence. So while they have complete loyalty, they don't get anything done. They can't do anything well. And I think that's part of what we're seeing with the Trump administration. The Lafayette Park attack, he had called governors that morning and told them to get their National Guards out on the street. That was supposed to be his coup day. He planned that to be his coup day, and it was going to be set off by this attack on protesters, had governors all over the country that he wanted to put National Guard on the streets at the same time. That was what was going on there. So this is not just some guy who's, a good entertainer. I don't think. My opinion, I don't think that.
Well, I mean, unlike Hitler, the people, again, as you point out, the people that he surrounded himself, aren't particularly good at what they do.
Right.
And, they're not the people, they're also not people that engender any ability to get people to follow them. I mean, it's like the one thing about a leader is that he wants people to follow him into hell and back. And they don't have that ability to do that. And I think that's the one thing that's saving us. It's like you look at the guys up in Michigan. I mean, these guys were, comically incompetent.
Right.
They're organizing on Facebook. Like, that's not going to draw the attention of the FBI. They're using coded language like "il que governor gay," get more way.
Big Latin.
So, I mean, the crack team at the NSA, took days to, unravel that one. But, what worries me about that is that, these guys were incompetent, but, there's going to be groups out there that are competent and, know how not to attract attention. And frankly, they do know how to communicate without being seen. And,
Right.
And that's where, I worry, coming up to the election, and especially the period between now and the election and inauguration, that, you could have these groups, come out and do something, at the behest of Trump.
Right. And I think that's what we saw in Michigan. I think you're right. He made a call to arms, said, liberate Michigan. They decided they were going to arrest the governor and take her somewhere, as they said, quote unquote, for a trial. Now, with these militia guys, when they say for a trial, they really mean for a hanging. That's what their intention was. And, they're kind of incompetent doofus, lower intelligence fellows. Usually that's who falls into these.
I call them members of Meal Team 6. So.
Well, that's a whole nother thing. The militia thing in general, I call them the Lard Army. And, I'm not afraid of them. I'm not afraid of them at all. I do think there will be sporadic violence. I know right now there's a security company that's hiring guards to that they say they're going to put them at polling places and keep out the Antifa types, which I'm sure means Democrats. They're going to try and, chase away anybody who they don't like how they look so that they can't vote. This is
Yeah, I'm
straight
pretty
up vote
sure that they
suppression.
won't be at the Paradise Valley polling station here
Exactly.
in Arizona.
Yeah. They won't turn up in Whiteyville.
Now, North Scottsdale, Paradise Valley,
Yeah.
where the rich people live. So,
Well, so this leads up to the election. And I'm wondering what you think. What are the kind of things, you're predicting some things will happen? What are the things you're predicting?
I think that you will probably see some low-level violence on election day. And I think this is the more unhinged members of the flock, may show up, try to, foment some violence. But I think it's going to be, sporadic. It's not going to be any concerted effort. I think that once you get to later that night, and it's going to depend on how the returns come in. I mean, it's like if there's an overwhelming victory for one side or the other, then I think that stops a lot of the violence. But if it's close and it's very uncertain, I think you're going to see people take to the streets on both sides. And I think that starts, November 4th. And after that, how it plays out is, there's a million permutations. And, I don't think that as time goes on, especially if this goes where, we go out weeks, and especially if we come up to that, I think it's December 12th, where you're supposed to certify the elections. If you get out there without certification, I think that then you may see concerted violence.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I believe we've spoken before about this, and my feeling is there will be sporadic acts of violence, as you suggested. And there are a lot of people in these groups who are going to wait back and see what happens. They're not going to get out in front. They're not the people out in front. The people that are going to be out in front are really the worst kind of white supremacist. So if something bad happens to them, I could live with that. And, we'll take it from there.
So anyway, that pretty well, gets, the basis of the history, with what I wanted to talk about tonight. I mean, the rest of it, if I could talk for an hour, but then you turn into, this, dry lecture that you'd expect in a political science class. Interesting, but it's, really not germane to what we need to talk about tonight.
Hey, Harry,
Harry,
you're just back in time.
Yeah, I knew
your
it was
segment.
going to be boring, so I left for a bit.
Oh,
thank you.
yeah, fuck you too. Let me just make that clear.
No, I'm actually now on my phone doing this because of technical issues. And yes, I'm back. Thanks. And I'll shut up and let Ed continue to talk now.
Actually, we're up for your segment.
Okay. Yeah,
right on time.
Well, I think it was a nice segue. I could hear for the last couple of minutes there. And quite honestly, I agree with Ed. Here's what I see. So right now, what we already have, I mean, for goodness sakes, you're seeing it happen in real time. We had the kidnapping attempt yesterday, which I don't know about you guys, but it certainly horrified me. But there's going to be more of that. Ongoing is this organizing and planning that they've been doing for months, and we're really in the end stages of it. We're actually ramping up to execution, meaning the execution of the plans they have laid. Multiple plans, multiple parties. Impossible to track, although I think the FBI is doing about as good a job as they can reasonably do. And quite honestly, they're very well practiced at it from having watched the rise of Islamic terrorism for the past several years. You are seeing the protests and the counter protests. Those are going to increase in frequency, and they're going to increase in violence. Again, we've already had gunshots at them. And it's just going to continue on that vein until the election itself. Election day is going to be really interesting. We're seeing mobilization on the right-wing side for poll monitoring. All right, well, let's be realistic. That's voter intimidation. Right. And it doesn't have to happen in a lot of places. Here, sitting in Silver Spring, Maryland, Tacoma Park, we're not going to see that here. But you could definitely see it in the swing states. North Carolina, I would absolutely bet on it. Arizona, again, I would expect to see that there as well. Mm-hmm. Any place where we're within that margin of error is going to be targeted for that. Now, go ahead.
And let's keep in mind that this is the first election in our lifetimes, practically, when it was legal again for Republicans to do voter intimidation. Up until now, there was a consent decree. The Republican Party signed a consent decree that said they would not engage in any voter suppression through voter intimidation. And that just expired prior to this election. So it's going to be full on. There's going to be full on that. I understand the plan, from the Trump administration is to count on the idea that they will have more in-person votes, declare victory on election night, and throw it to the Supreme Court. So we'll see, what having a partisan court, how that affects this as well.
Which obviously informs their drive to actually get Amy Coney Barrett in there. Before, because they need to have her sat on the bench to adjudicate these things. The other things, we always see mistakes happen. We always see, polls close early, volunteers not showing up. That's just the normal friction of elections, and that's nonpartisan. But we're going to see things happen that are going to try to sow more confusion, and not just from the Republican right, but from Russia, China, Iran. They're already gearing up. They're already interfering. They will do more, and they will probably do whatever they can to attack however many voting systems they can penetrate. And again, they don't have to penetrate 50 of them. They only need to get the key states, those swing states. So it makes it much easier to target the ones that will really have an effect.
But last time they did penetrate all 50 states. Reality Winner is in jail now for telling us the news that they infiltrated 26 states. And of course, all the people at the state said, "Oh, we don't think there's been any vote tampering," but they don't know. They had no idea. They didn't even know that they got attacked until Reality Winner told the world.
True. I think the point, though, is that they don't have to be super successful 50 times.
No, right.
They only have to be super successful and put all of their efforts into the key targeted states. And again, any place where you can just go on 538 and see the states that are within the margin of error, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, etc. That's where you're going to see the efforts at mass penetration and deeper penetration.
Well, that brings up my question is if you see that and there's good indications, I mean, is this going to be like a situation in Belarus where, one aggrieved party says we're not going to accept, this election and its outcome?
Well, that goes right into what we're really going to see overall. This is all under the heading of setting up pretext for legal challenges. So yes, if there's a hint that something went wrong and Trump loses the election, you can bet there will be a legal challenge. There's going to be a legal challenge anyway. There will be more teeth in it if we can see that something actually happened, or any number of different challenges can be made on this from both sides.
Right, and they are prepared now to challenge the vote in every state.
Right. And so all of this is ramping up to be able to give legal grounds for that. And, all of this comes down to the fact that at the very minute that the polls close, there will be a demand for an immediate decision. Well, first off, that never happens. However, you can bet that if they don't get their immediate decision, that just is going to go added to the pile of reasons to complain to the courts. Mm-hmm. And so it's just going to be very, very confusing from the time that the polls open until there is a decision. And,
one of the other questions I've got for you is, your experience as a military intelligence analyst, is there a situation that has occurred, in your career that is like what we're facing?
Every election I saw in Kosovo, Iraq, and Afghanistan, yes.
That makes
all
me
those
feel
shenanigans
better.
happen. The difference is we're just not used to seeing those things here. And the other difference is that, as elections have always been prone to violence, we have all the ingredients to make it that much more worse. Whether you want to call it a civil war or not, there's going to be a lot of violence. So let's talk about what happens after the election itself, after the polls close, until we get to what I call decision day. Decision day is when either the vote is verified or the courts decide or something happens, but we finally anoint the next president. On decision day, it's going to be pretty awful either way. There will be spontaneous violence because people are going to act out. But worse than that, there's going to be planned violence. And that's where we're going to see more things like the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping attempt, assassination attempts, or actual, successful assassinations. And it could be so extreme that it would trigger the military. And by military, I mean either National Guard or actual active duty military forces. Either way, it's going to look the same, because if the National Guard is activated, they'll be acting as a military force with all the bells and whistles that go along with that. And you can just expect that's going to happen as we move past the election and into the violence that follows.
Well, that's a pretty bold prediction.
Well, every time there's an event, there's a decision that comes off of that event. The more events we have, the more decisions are going to be made. Every time a decision is made, it gets less and less predictable, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So the further this goes on, the more the impossible becomes the possible, and the more the improbable becomes the probable. And we can talk again later once we know who has been decided upon. I'm sure that we will, but I think everybody needs to be prepared. The lesson here is not to, bring your hands and hide away. The lesson is to be prepared.
So what would you suggest people do to be prepared?
Well, I think the first thing you need to do is you need to know where you are. You need to know where you are in your environment. If you are the lone Democrat in Sierra Vista, Arizona, for instance, you probably don't want to have bumper stickers and yard signs out. First off, you're not going to change anybody's mind. All you're doing is advertising that you are the other. And you need to take caution about that, because it might not be your neighbors that are angry, but maybe your neighbor's friends. And all they have to do is see that sign, and they know where you are and what you are, and they're going to take action on it. I used to think some time ago, before things got this bad, and I'm talking just within the last month or two, that the people who were most at risk were the ones in the rural areas, because it's just much easier to do things out there where the cops aren't. But more and more, we're seeing this happen in the cities. And I would say there are no safe places if you are the other. If you are
here's another take on that, which actually I agree with you, is that in the city, everybody expects the cops are going to come rescue. It's been my experience, when my house was robbed, the police didn't show up till 2 hours later, sit around, write a report, and that was it. They're not a personal security service.
No.
Everybody thinks they are, but they're not.
And on top of that, depending on the jurisdiction, you may have a sheriff, as we just saw in Michigan today, who actually will help them, or at least stand by and let them do what they want to do. I think one of the lessons that we must learn as a nation coming out of this is that the chief law enforcement officer of a jurisdiction probably should not be an elected office anymore. That's just my thought. I realize that's a constitutional change. I get that. But, if they're more worried about voters than they are about supporting the law and the Constitution.
Well, I've actually had that experience also. I've got, and I need to disguise this as much as I can, but one of the kids that I've been following, a friend of my daughter's who went into the military, is somebody that, God, I can't do that. I'll just get him in. I don't want to take a chance and get him in trouble. But anyway, the conversation has come up that, I question his political loyalties and the ability to be neutral and not pick a side if something like this happens.
Yeah. It's a terrible thing. When I enlisted in 1985, so a long time ago, certainly contentious times. And, I had political opinions, and everybody around me did, but we hardly ever talked politics. I mean, we just didn't. Mm-hmm. And I don't recall any time in my military career where anybody that I knew was making a decision based on a political preference. Now, I somewhat famously got some generals in trouble once because they were making decisions about how to influence policy, but not politics, not party politics. my sense is now that sense, that ethos is weakening.
Well, along that line is how far has the Proud Boys and Three Percenters and Oath Keepers and all those guys infiltrated the military?
And police departments.
And especially police departments.
Well,
yeah.
we know for a fact that the police officer that was killed, that assassinated actually in Stockdale, California? Yeah, Stockton, sorry. Was killed by an active duty Air Force airman who was a 3%er.
Right. Well, and I think that's what we've seen throughout the Black Lives Matter protests have been these white supremacists really trying to foment violence that will be blamed on Black Lives Matter protesters.
Like
it was
Minneapolis.
Yeah, it was never their intention to take credit for the murder.
Right.
And it isn't when they do these things. They want for someone else to be blamed for the murder. That's their tactic.
Yeah. So it's and it's nothing new. I mean, if you just put sepia tones on the newsreel footage and squinted your eyes a little bit, you could be looking at a newsreel from Germany, 1936.
Well, and we saw this in the 60s too. This kind of, vigilante violence, and of course we had, leftist organizations at that time who were engaged in bombing and other acts of violence. But I know when I was a teenager protesting, I got beat up by a group of, burly adult men for putting flyers on cars.
Yeah.
And I, in some ways, I kind of feel like you have to still be who you are. I'm not sure I would advise people not to put up signs in their yard, but if your concern is only security, you might want to do that. If your concern is also democracy, you might want to keep them up.
So I've got some very dear friends in Phoenix, Tempe actually, who put up a Black Lives Matter sign in their yard, in their corner lot. And they posted on Facebook, and I immediately, sent a message out and called them up and said, hey, you're really making yourself a target. And they decided to continue doing it, which was fine. I support their decision. I just wanted them to make an informed decision and not just assume that the norms of, any time before 2016 were going to keep them free and safe, because all bets are off right now.
Right. And that was the reason for my comment too. I want people to make a considered decision, not a fear-based decision, not a foolishness-based decision, weigh your circumstance. I don't know if I would feel the same way if somebody lived in Arkansas. And I do have a friend in Arkansas who just put up a Biden sign in her yard. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
I'll get the report on that. You can't always be cowed. And I think that's one of the things that I really feel strongly about. And it's kind of the basis of this show. We're not taking your shit anymore. We're not going to let you pretend like you're brave and we're not.
I completely agree with that, by the way. Go ahead, Ed. I'm sorry.
Well, what I was going to say is just on a historical basis, I think you look at Black Lives Matter and there's some overlap. If you go back and look at the French Revolution, I mean, people are starving in the streets. The elites are saying, well, we've got a whole warehouse full of bread and food, but you can't have it. We're going to sell it to Poland.
Right.
And now it's like, well, you can ask for your rights, but at some point, you're going to have to go take them. And I think that's what you're seeing in the attitudes in the Black Lives Matter movement is that, we're not going to take your shit anymore. We've been doing this for 400 years and we're not doing it another one.
One of the things that has really heartened me about the Black Lives Matter movement is that when you see the Black Lives Matter crowd, you see a multiracial, multi-ethnic crowd.
Multi-age.
And multi-age crowd. That's absolutely true. When I walk downtown Washington, D.C., on Black Lives Matter Plaza, I am just one of many colors and races and hues there. That's just true. And when I walk down the street here in Tacoma Park, I think I'm probably the only house that doesn't have a Black Lives Matter sign because I'm not allowed to in my lease. So it really is. This is the voice of America now, and we're supporting the Black Lives Matter overwhelmingly in the polls. Americans support BLM, And that I think is a healthy sign, a very healthy sign.
Right. Right. And these white supremacists, this is their last gasp.
Yeah.
this-
The new
this is
younger
their last hurrah.
generation, the new younger generation is bigger than baby boomers.
Yeah.
Well,
And they are
demographically, this fight's over.
Yeah.
This fight's over. I mean, it's like
This is the last election that we have to worry about. We're the old soldiers here. If we win
Yeah.
this election, everything will take care of itself from then on in.
Yeah, I mean, if Biden and the Democrats win, this may be truly the last battle of the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah, there's
what
a
if
big
they
but.
don't?
Then it's not the last battle.
No. And you can bet. I think ultimately we will come through this okay. Is that next year, next election cycle, next decade? I don't know. I think that if Trump and his minions do win, they're going to do everything they can, place every law that they can, replace every law that they can, that will ensure their supremacy until they die out.
Yeah, I think the plan is to form a dictatorship, and I think that was always Trump's plan, and I think that he's still gung ho to do it. His prior attempts have failed to have a coup, and that's the plan. I'm not afraid of that, though. I'm not afraid of any of this stuff. I think it will take 40 years to completely purge the country of the influence of the people who support Donald Trump, and that's whether he wins or loses. If he loses, he's not going away. He might be going to jail. He might be going to jail, but he's not going away. And that, of course, kind of brings us up to the third topic for today. And that's something I want to talk about, which is after we win this election, and I'm fairly confident that we will, despite all the impediments that they put up, do we really need to just continue on to destroy the Republican Party? Is that what we need to have a democracy, to have a country that works for citizens, that provides services to citizens, that supports them? Because the Republican Party of today, and this really started after black people got the right to vote, is a party of voter suppression, widespread voter suppression, lots of tactics of voter suppression, and lots of efforts to keep, there's only one party in this country that's trying to get people not to vote. It's not the Democrats. The Democrats are trying to get people to vote. Flyvote.com. Go visit. But another party is trying to prevent people from voting, to try and create legal hurdles to people voting, like voter ID. And, again, voter ID is something that will outlive its usefulness, because that was a segregationist way to keep older people from voting who might not even have a birth certificate.
Yeah.
And now we're aging out of those people, and younger people are more ready to pull out their ID. But it feels like, to me, the Republican Party is, one, a corporate shill, two, a party whose, if you look at all of their agenda items, they all have the same purpose. That's to increase the number of workers and reduce the pay that they receive for their work. They don't want anybody to retire. They don't want anybody to be disabled. They don't want anybody to have any opportunity not to crawl to work during a pandemic and work in a place of sickness. And that's because they don't believe in democracy. They don't believe in government for the people. They believe in, the Citizens United style of government. Somebody pays me and I do their bidding.
Well,
and it's never been worse than it is now.
Well, that's the whole point, is when you look at the people most upset about people not going to work, it was the lady in Paradise Valley who couldn't get her hair done because her hairdresser couldn't come into work. So, it was the imposition on, the wealthy and elite that was really the issue. It was,
Right.
Not to mention the fact that people, still needed a job to make the house payments, but the people out protesting were the ones that were being imposed on because they couldn't go get their latte in the morning.
Right. And, this is not just a Trump problem. This has been a long-standing Republican problem. The Republican Party has never been, well, not never, but in many, many years, and most of my lifetime, has never been a party that did things for people. It's always been a party that considered workers to be chattel, to be, their warehouse inventory, Workers are inventory. And then there are these other people who are well off, and the workers are there to benefit them. So what Donald Trump is doing right now, and what Republicans, Mitch McConnell and others are doing right now, is they're trying to starve people into going back to dangerous work situations. It's cold, it's callous, it's criminal, I think, morally criminal, if not. And I just kind of feel like we have to finish this job and dispose of the Republican Party.
So I mean, it's nothing new. I mean, you go back, part of my life was in southeastern Kentucky. That's what they did to coal miners back in the 20s and 30s. Because it, go down in a place filled with coal dust.
Yeah,
you need
you go until you get sick, and then we'll replace you with another poor starving schlub.
So let's look at the other component of this that you haven't really touched on, and that is, so how do these other poor schlubs support this kind of behavior? And the answer is because they don't recognize that that's the overarching motive behind it. What they recognize is the fear mongering that has happened, and they're worried about losing their place as the dominant race, as the dominant gender. They're worried about everything that the Republicans throw out there, the hordes of caravans of immigrants coming from the South, the sickness and disease that they'll bring, as opposed to the sickness and disease that's actually here. And it's this real base ignorance that they're able to play on. And
yeah, my neighbor here is just outside the silo, has always been a staunch Republican, and we had him over for dinner the other night, and he was just, the stuff he was talking about, these conspiracy theories, and he knows very well that we're here not that far from the border, but we don't have border crossers coming into our neighborhoods. We don't have them stopping at our house to steal stuff. We don't even see them. It's not happening. And one of the things he said was that his son traveled across the southern part of the country. And, he was in New Orleans, and then he was in Raleigh, and then he was in, I think, many other good middle-sized cities. And he was surprised, and my friend was surprised, that the cities didn't look like really they were burning.
Yeah.
What's going on? There's no burning going on. So they had, in their mind, decided that the cities were just burning down because of the propaganda they've been fed.
And that propaganda has been enabled since the 80s by a number of things, not the least of which is cable and internet. I mean,
and Ronald Reagan, who said government is the problem. Well, yes. Government's not the problem. It's never been the problem. Government's not perfect, but it's not the cause of your misery.
Right.
And they took away the fairness doctrine. So you can lie through your teeth on TV and nothing you can do about it. I mean, it's like the political ads we're seeing here in Arizona are mind-boggling.
Well, yeah.
Well, back in the day, back before cable was prevalent, back before the internet, when the three networks really did have a monopoly, or at least a control on the media, you needed something like that. And I'm not saying you don't need something now, but the reality is most people aren't getting their news from NBC, ABC, CBS anymore. They're getting it from Twitter, from Facebook, and they're able to channel into whatever craziness they want to believe. And that has really been a huge problem for society, because if all you're listening to is just one source of information, I'm not even going to say Fox News or whatever, all you're doing is listening to the news that feeds your fears. That's where you're going to go.
Well, that's feeding fear is more powerful than using a carrot.
Oh, sure.
Right. And a lot of these things like OAN, the network that Trump now likes because they're kinder to him than Fox News, and Fox News, Fox News makes a profit, but none of these other right-wing media sites make a profit. They're all funded by some rich guy as his propaganda arm. And I will tell you this. Here's another thing I want to tell you while we're on the subject, and then we'll get past it. Think tanks are also propaganda firms.
Absolutely. On both sides.
Yeah. Think tanks, you might think they're very academic and they're very thoughtful, but the fact is some guy comes to them with money and says, I want you to work on this idea, or I want you to fund this conservative pundit. My ex-father-in-law was a well-known think tank guy in Washington, D.C., and he just had rich people who would pay for him to promote the things they believed in.
Right. Absolutely. Like,
So there's a lot of this misinformation and dishonest broker happening
very much
now.
so.
And I think we're not going to get rid of Citizens United as long as we have a Republican Party,
No.
and we're not going to restore democracy as long as we have Citizens United. Money is not speech. I don't care what you say. Money is not speech. You know, you could get up and say what you want to say. That's speech, and that should be your right. But I don't think you should be free from criticism for that, because that's my right.
I can't remember if I was in Afghanistan or Iraq when the decision for Citizens United came out. I just remember I was very disconnected, and that decision came down, and I just couldn't believe it. I really did not believe that was happening in America. And it's changed everything. Since that came out.
Right. It was bad before. It's 10 times worse now. It's the Republican Party on steroids.
Yep.
So the second part of my question is, I'm interested in what you guys think. If we require the destruction of the Republican Party in order to restore democracy and have a democratic country that serves its people, how do we do that?
Well, I don't think we can do it legislatively or, through the courts.
Yeah.
I think what ultimately is going to happen, I agree with you that it needs to be destroyed, or at least so changed that it's unrecognizable. I think in much the same way that we have reduced smoking in this nation, you work on this next generation, as we talked about in the last segment. The next generation coming up is going to find it very uncool to be a Republican.
That's already happened.
It's already happening.
Yeah, that's a done deal.
And as they grow in power, as they grow in numbers, as more of them are born and become of election age or voting age, I think that's really going to be the thing that puts the nail in their coffin.
Well, I mean, Jimmy, to answer your question, from my view as an ex-Republican and apostate, you don't really have to do anything. It's dying of its own accord. I mean, people like me who thought would be a reason, and
me too.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right. I'm the only Democrat here. Well, I'm not now, but I'm the only person who grew up a Democrat. Yes, I'm the only person here who grew up a Democrat. You guys are reformed, and good on you.
But I saw things inside the party that made me leave the party, but at the same time, I saw the seeds of its own destruction and death being planted willfully. And it's like, you don't really, all you have to do is just not get in the way of them destroying themselves.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They're losing people like myself and other friends. There's a lot of other people who, when I see them and I know that they're, pretty much like me, it's like, you realize that in that party, you own them. You own, the bigotry, the hatred, the violence, the
anti-feminism,
the anti-intellectualism.
The anti-intellectualism.
The whole kit and caboodle. So, why would you stay with a party like that? I mean, I understand inertia. I understand that, you grew up, that's your family party. That's, the way that was my family's party. But at some point you have to look at that and say, is that what you really want? Is that what you want for your children, for society? Now, for some people, that's exactly what they want. So they're getting that. But I think once you boil it down, the Republican Party is now almost where it's going to be 17% of the population. Those are the people that are the hardcore Trump voters, will still be there afterwards. And I think that's what's going to be left to the Republican Party. And we've always talked about third parties, but I think at some point that I think you're going to wind up with that, because I see now that I've been dallying with Democrats for a few years, that, you have the 30-year-old progressives that are holding their nose for this election and voting for Biden. But, there's some cracks in a possible schism in their party too.
Right. Well, we would certainly be a better country if we had 5 or 6 parties. We would be a better country for it. We'd be a better country, frankly, a stronger democracy if we had a parliamentary system. But that's for another show.
Yeah, that's another lifetime.
But,
that's
we're not going to see that.
No, but that's for another lifetime. But I do think part of ending the Republican Party is to enact certain reforms that, and maybe constitutional amendments that prevent that take our weak form of democracy. You know, none of us had any idea how weak it was.
Right.
Take our weak form of democracy and strengthen it. Take our weak form of democracy and make sure that one despicable, dishonest person can't rob us and cheat us and steal from us and have the power of the government to do that.
You know, you use the word weak. I would substitute the word fragile for that. I don't think
Right.
any of us realized just how fragile this system was. And the things that we thought were hard and fast rules were simply customs.
Yeah, customs
Right.
and norms that just sort of get passed down from one to the next.
Yeah.
And Trump just had the brilliant observation that you could come in, ignore all those, and pretty much destroy the entire shooting match.
Absolutely.
Well, but he had people supporting him to do that. This again, everything has happened now. Started when Ronald Reagan said, you know, government isn't the solution; it's the problem.
No, I think it started a little bit before that, but that certainly put it on the fast track.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, the seeds had been there since the 50s. And I think the real kickoff was Johnson in 1964 Civil Rights Act.
Yeah, I do
Yeah.
too.
Yeah,
I would put it there when you saw the Dixiecrats.
Well, the great realignment. It's like the Dixiecrats that have been, you know, lifelong Democrats said, well, you know, we actually think like they do, so we're going to go over there. And so, you know, you've got it now that in the Venn diagram in our politics, there is literally no overlap between the parties.
Right. And what happened there is intricately tied into both racism and evangelical Christianity.
Totally. You know, when you look at, and I grew up as an evangelical. I grew up in the white South.
Well, you had a lot of disadvantages, buddy.
Let me tell you,
Hey, I was a Southern
I
Baptist.
didn't know it at the time. I thought I was king of the world, you know?
Yeah, you turned out pretty good.
Well, it's amazing.
I mean, I can quote you some Bible verses, buddy.
Yeah, I'll bet.
But seriously, though,
The two of
you're
you.
absolutely right. The evangelicals are part of this, and they don't even realize it. They got where they are right now because they made some serious deals with the devil, literally, in their world, and thought they were going for the right thing. And now they're being held up with this mirror in front of them, and they're starting to see it. And I don't think they know their way out of it. I think the same goes for the evangelical Christianity part as it does with the Republican Party. Their kids are going to be embarrassed by them, and their grandchildren will laugh at them.
Well, and you know, it's important to remember that evangelicals are the ones that brought Russia into the Republican Party.
Very much so. And I remember when that was happening at the time and thinking, good God, really? Just because they're bringing the Russian Orthodox Church back? I mean, obviously they have no idea.
It's because they hate gay people. That's what they have in common.
Yeah,
homosexuality is what attracted evangelicals to the dictatorship in Russia. And once they got there, they've never left.
They've never left. And Russia really hasn't changed.
Yeah.
It's still Russia. It's still the Soviet Union deep down.
Well, that's about it for our first chapter in Street Fight Politics. It's been wonderful to have this conversation. I knew you guys were a good pick when you picked me. And, you know, we're going to be coming back to you on a weekly basis. I think we're going to do Tuesdays. We haven't talked about whether we're going to do next Tuesday, but I hope that you will come back, and I hope that you will spend this time with us, and I hope that we can all learn something about this crazy world we live in.
And one thing I want to get out there is that we will be live November 3rd, the night of the election.
For sure.
We'll stay online as long as we can, as long as there's something to talk about. And I imagine there's going to be a lot to talk about.
Well, I probably will dive off before you guys will, because I got to work the next day, and I'm 3 hours ahead of you. But
yeah. So don't ever turn the other cheek. Politics is a street fight. Put up your dukes and take them out.